You've probably heard somebody say at one time or another, just don't bring up politics or religion, right? That's part of the culture that we live in. You don't bring up controversial things like politics or religion. And we also say things like religion is a private matter. It's not something we should talk about openly or with each other because it's a very private thing. And part of that stems from a culture that highly values tolerance, right? That we want to be tolerant of everybody. Unfortunately, so often the way people understand or define tolerance is that tolerance is about agreeing on everything. And that's not what tolerance is. Tolerance is about learning to love people and appreciate and respect and honor people that we disagree with. And that's part of what we want to understand, because if we believe that tolerance is agreeing with everybody, then we should not do evangelism, because it's going to be a controversial thing. It's going to challenge people's thinking. And what hopefully you understand about the Bible and we understand about the Bible is going to push and challenge people. But if we understand properly what tolerance is about, then hopefully people will be open to having a conversation about spiritual things. The first section, if you forget what the first two, these are strategies in building bridges of grace. That's kind of the theme that we're working with throughout these sessions. If you missed the first two, go back, watch those two, because we're going to dive right in on number 3. So number 3 in these strategies of building bridges of grace is called coffee, dinner, and gospel. Coffee, dinner, gospel. What do we mean by that? Well, Immanuel Kant was a great philosopher from history. He talked about the divide between the noumenal and phenomenal. And I like to use these big words so that you think I'm smarter than what I am. But let's talk about what noumenal and phenomenal mean. Noumenal is about things like ethics and values and things that are really, core to who we are and how we think. But they're very, in our culture at least, very personal, very intimate. Phenomenal are things like facts and evidence and data, things that pretty much everybody's comfortable talking about. And when you meet somebody and you're building conversation, you talk about the weather, you talk about sports, you talk about other things. These days, all we talk about is COVID-19 and what's happening, how it's affecting us personally. And it's there's this line, imaginary line that we draw between the phenomenal and the noumenal. It's okay to talk to people about the phenomenal. In fact, we encourage that. We want to get to know people at a surface level. And so we talk about the phenomenal all the time, and we keep it safe. We talk about things that are in the realm of what's safe to talk about with people. And in Western phenomenon is that we make this divide between the sacred and the secular. Most other cultures don't make that kind of divide. It's unique to Western culture that we make this divide between what is sacred and what is secular. Things that are safe to talk about, things that aren't safe to talk about. And it's relevant. It overlaps with this noumenal and phenomenal. Conversations, interests, values, and worldviews. Part of what we talk about when it comes to coffee, dinner, and the gospel is that once you get to know somebody, maybe you have a neighbor, maybe you have a coworker, a family member, a friend, that you just say to them, hey, I'd love to talk to you over coffee sometime. Or maybe in the course of talking about COVID-19 and the coronavirus and how it's impacting them, you've got a little deeper into their lives and their fears. And instead of, out across the street, you want to, say, hey, instead of, I would love to talk with you more about this. Do you want to do coffee sometime? And I know we can't do that right now because all the Starbucks and coffee shops are closed, but maybe you can invite them to the backyard, that instead of having the conversation out in the street in the front yard, you say, hey, I'd love to talk more with us. Let's sit in the lawn chairs on the screen porch in the backyard and have a deeper conversation. And you have to figure out what's safe and what's appropriate during these times. But once we bridge from the front yard to the backyard, Then we go deeper into those. What are the values of this person? What's important to them? And that's getting deeper into somebody's life. And then we can begin to talk about spiritual things, because that's where we enter into the noumenal world of what really drives life, what's meaningful and important to me. But we can't just do that. When we first meet somebody, most often we're not going to dive into those deep regions of the noumenal when we're just getting to know someone. Wouldn't be appropriate, especially in Western culture. People are going to be like this. They're going to say, this guy's weird. They're going to run the other direction. And so once we sit down over coffee, then we can go to the next step and say, hey, I'd love to have you and your family over for dinner sometime. And I know it's going to be a few months before we can do that. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Do what you can and what's safe to honor the regulations we've got right now and having those conversations with people. But go from coffee, where you can begin to go a little bit deeper into somebody's life, and then sit down over dinner and have the opportunity, or invite them to something like Alpha. Those of you who are part of Sunlight Lake Worth know that's something we do every year. I mentioned that in the last session. We do Alpha, where it's a great opportunity for people who don't know anything about religion or about Christianity can come and ask questions. We just came out of a great time together of conversation over Alpha with some folks who are very new to the faith. And it's just a wonderful opportunity to sit down over a meal and have a conversation about spiritual things. So just to understand that process from coffee to dinner to gospel, from the front yard to the backyard, gets us deeper into some of those conversations. All right, number 4 in our strategies in building bridges with people is listen to their story. And this is just vital in how we approach people. We talked about this last time, that we don't approach people as projects. We don't come with a canned presentation, because people know and they sense if we think of them as a project. We want to love people. And if we truly love people, and if you watch the video in session 2, the Danny DeVito movie clip, it's just a powerful moment where he says, if you really want to know him, ask him about his kids. Ask him about his life. Ask him what's important to him. And it is so important that here's a quote from Francis Chan right here. Don't assume that you know what their faith or religion does or believes. Instead, ask as many questions as possible so that you hear properly. And I think that's so important. That we listen, because just because somebody identifies themselves as an agnostic doesn't mean everything you've read about agnosticism applies to this person. Same with atheism or Islam or Buddhism. Don't just think, oh, I got this person pegged. I know exactly what they think and I can address those issues without even asking them. Because how they think and how they incorporate their beliefs into their lives is unique to every individual. And you want to listen, you want to ask questions and really understand and listen. And one of the things that can really help you is to read some good books. I brought some more books. I brought some of those that I mentioned in the last couple sessions. This is kind of a core one to everything we're talking about, Sam Chan, Evangelism in a Skeptical World. But when it comes to understanding people who come from a different perspective, Unchristian by David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons. Great book. And let me just, before I read a little bit from this one, this is also another one. It's a little older book. I think you can still get it by a guy named Tom Rainer. It's called Surprising Insights from the Unchurched. And he does interviews with lots of unchurched people who've actually come to church and have grown in their faith and become followers of Jesus Christ. And he asks them why and how that came about. So it's really good insights. And it will really help us as we get to know people and talk and listen to their story, that we gain some perspective. Because depending on some of you grew up in unchurched families, grew up outside of the church, so that's familiar territory for you. But some of you listening to this grew up in the church and you've been surrounded by church culture and the Christian worldview your whole life. And to really understand somebody from another perspective, do your homework. Do your homework and figure out what some of that looks like. Let me just give you some examples. This is some examples from Unchristian by Dave Kinnaman. He did surveys. That's part of what he and his organization do, is surveys of people, and they did surveys of unchurched people. And they asked him, some questions about what is unfavorable to you when you think about Christianity and those who are either born again or evangelical Christians. And the number one answer, the first thing that people said when they said, what do they think unfavorably about Christians, is that they hate homosexuals. Can you believe that? That was 91% said a lot or some Christians are anti-homosexual or hate homosexuals. Folks, I don't know about you, but that just blows my mind and breaks my heart, that the first thing that most unchurched people think about somebody who's a follower of Jesus Christ is that they hate anyone or anything. And yet that is the impression that we as followers of Christ in our world have given to people who don't go to church, is that we hate homosexuals. And man, when we build relationships with people, we've got to know that's in the back of their mind, that that's part of how they think about who we are. And that's part of why it's so important that we do coffee, that we do dinner together. Because it's one thing to say, hey, I love people. I don't care if they're homosexual. I love people. It's a whole nother thing for them to sit down with you over dinner or over coffee and hear you talk about Michael, one of your friends who is homosexual, and how you relate to them and how you're a friend with them. Because then that immediately breaks down that wall. And I don't have time to go into all these. My glasses just broke. That's just amazing. So I'll have to go blind from here on out. But I'm not going to read too many more of those. But if you get a chance, look at that book. Maybe you can find some information like that online from Dave Kinnaman. He works with the Barna Group. But listen to people, right? Next one, tell your story. Once you listen to their story, then begin to open the door to telling your story. And when you tell your story, I want to encourage you. This is one of the things we do at Sunlight Lake Worth. Is anybody who comes through members class, we teach them in the first session to how to write their testimony. Just give them some pointers on writing their testimony. And then we encourage every person who comes through the members class to write down their testimony the first time. If you have never done that, do it. Write it down. And then give it to somebody and say, is this a good story? Because sometimes we tell our testimonies, and frankly, I've heard some testimonies, they're just bad. They're either boring or self-righteous, or they're just off. And make sure your story is a good story. Let me just give you one example. And I was 16 years old. It was my first solo mission to drive the family vehicle to high school. And it was a cold winter morning. I had convinced my parents that I was responsible enough, that I would take the van. I had practice after school, so I was going to go straight to school and then straight home again, and everything would be fine. And we didn't have much money growing up, and it was our primary means of transportation for the whole family. It was amazing that it worked out for me to be able to drive the van to school that day, but I was excited. So, of course, a couple of my buddies want to jump in with me, so we're driving straight to school. And it's a cold winter morning, roads are packed with snow, and it's not real, it's not ice, but it's packed with snow all in the side roads around school. And I know I'm supposed to go straight to school. I mean, it's solo flight. I'm gonna land the plane. I'm gonna get back home safely, prove to mom and dad I can do all this. You see where this is going, right? But I've decided, we got a little time. We're early, so we're gonna just drive around just a little bit before school, have some fun with my buddies in the van. And those of you who've grown up in colder climates, if you're a Floridian, this does not relate to you at all. But when it's really super cold early in the morning, and somebody starts their car sitting along the side of the road, it creates this huge cloud of smoke and steam, and it can be a sizable cloud. And so we're driving along, and sure enough, somebody has this sizable cloud. They've just started their car on the side of the road, and so I go in blind on one side, and sure enough, the other car's coming the other way, goes around that car, comes into my lane, right in the middle of the cloud, just bam, big crash right there. I mean, bodies flying. My friend Brian was sitting in the back, no seatbelt. You know, he's comes up towards the windshield, and, you know, it wasn't that bad. He was fine. Everybody was fine. However, the van was totaled. And I immediately, I was devastated, because I knew we didn't have the money to replace that van. We didn't have the money for, you know, what it was going to do to our insurance. All these things just come flooding down. And I'm looking at the van, the radiators pushed up into the engine, and I just know it's done. And, you know, the police come, all that. I finally get to the principal's office, and I got to call my parents. And my dad, I love my dad. He was my best man at my wedding. But my dad could be a hard man. And I knew that when I had to call my parents, I dialed the phone, and I'm kind of praying as I'm listening to the phone ring, Lord, just please let Mom answer the phone. You know, just please let it be Mom. I'd rather tell Mom than my dad. And I'm crying because I'm an emotional guy, and I'm just like waiting for somebody. And sure enough, Dad comes on the phone. And I'm like, Dad, I wrecked the van, you know. It's not drivable. I'm trying to explain what happened. And this is what my dad says. He says, Chris, are you okay? I said, yeah, Dad, I'm fine. He says, that's all that matters. We'll work out the rest. I was just blown away. I could not believe that my dad, who I knew was upset about this, and I knew the impact it was going to have on him and the rest of the family, and all he wanted to know was I okay? And I just think, you know, that day for me helped me understand the grace of God. I never forgot that. And my dad reflected to me that day God's grace. Because we come into God's presence thinking that we deserve judgment, that we're not worthy to be in His presence, that we're not worthy to be loved by Him. That's how I felt that day. And God responds to us with His grace through His Son, Jesus Christ, who took our sins upon Himself on the cross. He gives us His grace. So there's the introduction. Define the mission, that solo drive to high school and back safely. Talk about the circumstances, the bridge, the crash, the conclusion when I talked to my dad on the phone, and then the denouement, you know, when we turn it towards what it means for us in the grace of Jesus Christ. And one of the beautiful things about story, when you tell stories, is people can't argue with stories, right? There's no, you know, well, I don't believe that, or it's your story, it's your experience, and that's part of what makes it powerful. And we're going to pick up there next time as we continue in these building bridges of grace. Thanks for tuning in.